My name is Andrew Carson. I'm 28. And 2 months ago, my mother looked me dead in the eye and screamed, "You're ungrateful. Get out. And don't come back." She meant every word. No tears. No hesitation. Just stone-cold dismissal like I was a tenant who missed rent, not her firstborn son. And I didn't yell back. I didn't slam the door or throw a tantrum. I just left. Quietly. Like a ghost finally deciding he's done haunting the wrong house. But what my family didn't realize that night, what they forgot was that I held the key to everything they were living off. Literally, because the house, it was in my name. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever felt like your love was a transaction, like your worth was tied to how much you gave, then you'll understand why I walked away. Hit, like if you've ever been guilt-tripped by the people who were supposed to love you. Drop a comment if you've been the responsible one and it backfired. And hey, subscribe if you're done letting guilt decide your life. Because this story, it's not about revenge. It's about truth. And boundaries. And what happens when the quiet one finally says, "No more." Let me take you back to the beginning. To the small second-story bedroom I spent most of my 20s in. Trying not to take up space in a house I was secretly paying for. The Carson family wasn't toxic in an obvious way. We were polished. Respectable. The kind of family that never missed church on Sunday. Always waved at the neighbors. And smiled for photos we never printed. My dad, Harold, used to be a warehouse logistics manager. Hardworking. Conservative. Believed in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps even if your boots were falling apart. Mom, Diane, was the kind of woman who volunteered at school bake sales but somehow forgot your birthday. Her default tone was polite disappointment. And then there's Mike, my younger brother. 4 years younger. But always treated like the future of the family. The creative one. The sensitive soul. Translation. He didn't have a job. Lived at home. And somehow never paid a bill. Me? I was the quiet achiever. Graduated college with a degree in computer science. Started working in remote tech consulting. Nothing flashy, but enough to live decently. Except I didn't move out. Because in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, I overheard my parents whispering in the kitchen. Mom was on the verge of tears. Dad looked hollow. "The bank called again," she said. "We can't defer another month." They didn't know I was listening. But I heard everything. And that night, I made a decision that would come back to haunt me in every possible way. I offered to cover the mortgage, just until things stabilize. I said. Dad gave a reluctant nod. Mom squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're a good son." No contract. No formal thanks. Just an expectation that started to grow like mold behind the walls. At first, it wasn't a big deal. I automated the monthly payments, bought my own groceries, covered internet, electricity, gas. Basically, if it had a bill attached to it, I handled it. I never brought it up. Not once. Because that's not how I was raised. In this house, real love meant sacrifice. Quiet, invisible sacrifice. And for a while, I believed that. But slowly, the atmosphere shifted. It started with Mike. He'd walk past my room, muttering under his breath, "Must be nice working in your pajamas while the rest of us suffer." Or, "Hey King Carson, did you pay for the Wi-Fi this month? Should I bow or something?" I laughed it off. Told myself he was just frustrated. Unemployed. Lost. Not his fault. But then Mom started joining in. "You're always holed up in that room. This isn't a hotel. Andrew, dinner's at 6. If you're late again, don't expect a plate." I started eating in my room, wearing my noise-canceling headphones all the time, not for music, but to block out the passive aggression leaking from the walls. And the more I gave, the less I seemed to matter. One night, I asked Mike to clean up after himself in the garage. He'd left paint cans and takeout boxes everywhere. Mom overheard and snapped. "He's your brother, not your servant." Stop acting like you're better than everyone. That's when something cracked inside me. Not because of the words, but because I realized they didn't see me anymore. Not as a person. Not as family. Just as the background help. The invisible provider. The worst part, Dad stopped defending me. He'd just sit in the living room, watching football, tuning it all out. That was his superpower. Disassociation. If there was tension, he simply turned up the volume. So I started pulling away. Emotionally. Mentally. Still paid the mortgage. Still filed their taxes. Still cleaned the gutters every weekend like it meant something. But inside, I was already gone. I just didn't know how literal that would become. Until the day my mother crossed her arms in the living room and said, "We've decided. It's time you moved out. You've become ungrateful." And what happened next? Well, let's just say that's when everything unraveled. Let me rewind the tape. Because before the explosion, there was a long, quiet burn. Before my mom told me to get out of the house I was paying for. Before my brother called me a parasite to my face. Before my dad stopped even pretending to be neutral, there was just me, working, providing, trying not to disturb the peace in a house built on silent expectations. You'd think paying someone's mortgage would earn you a little respect. But in my family, it earned me silence, indifference, resentment. Even, funny how the more I gave, the less I was worth. It started with the pandemic. Dad's warehouse downsized, and he was laid off after 22 years. Mom's nannying jobs dried up overnight. Mike dropped out of community college, claimed he was going to focus on his music, and then proceeded to play Fortnite for 14 months straight. I had just signed a long-term contract with a Bay Area tech firm, remote work, decent pay, health insurance. I felt lucky, grateful. And maybe that's what messed me up. Because when I saw Mom crying quietly at the kitchen table, bills spread out like landmines. And when I saw Dad rubbing his temples like the whole world was too loud, I wanted to help. So I did. "Let me cover the mortgage," I offered. "Just until you get back on your feet." They hesitated. For half a second, then Dad nodded. And Mom smiled like I'd passed some invisible test. But no one ever said thank you. Not once. It just became normal. Routine. Expected. After that, things started shifting. I was still working 50, 60 hours a week, balancing 3 clients, fixing bugs at midnight because some CTO in San Jose couldn't remember his AWS login. Meanwhile, Mike was sleeping in till noon, leaving half-eaten Pop-Tarts on the counter, and borrowing my charger without asking because apparently, that's what family does. Mom started knocking on my door more often, asking if I'd run to the store, take the trash out, look at the Wi-Fi. Not asking. More like informing, like I was the live-in help. "Since you're already home all day, you're good with numbers, right? Can you handle our taxes this year? Andrew, you forgot to replace the toilet paper again?" I kept telling myself it was temporary, that this was what good sons do. But the longer it went on, the more it started to feel like I didn't live there. I just paid for the privilege of being resented. There was one day I'll never forget. I was in the kitchen, making coffee. Mike strolled in, barefoot, shirtless, holding his guitar like it was an extension of his body. He looked me up and down and said, "You know, you should really get out more. All you do is sit in that cave and type." I didn't even look up. "I'm working, Mike." He laughed, loud and sharp. "Yeah? Okay. Working. On what Facebook memes?" Before I could answer, Mom called from the other room. "Mike, don't antagonize your brother." Then added, not even a beat later, "Andrew, you really should get some sunlight." It was like they thought I was broken. Like being responsible made me boring. Like paying the bills made me a burden. There was no acknowledgement, no appreciation, only expectation with a side of sarcasm. And Dad? He was barely there. He'd retreat into the garage or the living room, TV blaring, pretending none of it was happening. I think in his mind, silence equal neutrality. But in mine, silence equal betrayal. The only escape I had were my noise-canceling headphones. I wore them constantly during work, meals, even late at night when the walls felt like they were closing in. They became a symbol of survival, a way to tune out a household that only saw me as valuable when my name was on a bank transfer. One night, while doing laundry, I found one of my pay stubs on top of the dryer. It had been opened, folded, read, then left there. Like trash. I never said anything. But I noticed Mom stopped asking if I was doing okay after that. Because now, she had confirmation. I was the financial engine of the household. No need to ask. Just expect. One of the few people who noticed I was unraveling was someone from work, Kendra, my team lead from one of the San Jose clients. We rarely talked beyond projects. But during one late-night Slack call, she messaged, "You okay? You look like you haven't slept in a week." I froze. No one in my house had asked me that. Not once. Just family stuff. I typed back, trying to keep everything together. Her reply came 2 minutes later. "You don't owe anyone your peace." I didn't respond. But the sentence lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. You don't owe anyone your peace. And then came the Sunday evening that changed everything. We were all in the living room. Mike was watching some reality show. Mom was scrolling through Facebook. Dad half asleep in the recliner. I was answering a Slack ping from Kendra. Headphones on. Zoned out. That's when I heard Mom's voice calm, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it. "Andrew, we've been talking." I pulled one ear cup back. We think it's time you moved out." I blinked. "What?" "You've become tense, isolated. It's not healthy. We're worried about you. Worried about me." I looked over at Dad. He didn't say a word, just looked at the carpet. Mike smirked, leaning back like he was watching a show. "You've overstayed." Mom added, "You're not a child anymore." And then twisting the knife, she said, "You're ungrateful." I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't even cry. I just stood up, walked to my room, and closed the door behind me. My hands were shaking. I stared at my laptop, my desk, the walls I had painted, the bills I had paid. The silence was thunderous, and all I could think was, they don't see me as a person anymore. Just a problem they can't wait to be rid of. But what they didn't realize was that I had stopped seeing them as family a long time ago. And the next thing I did, that was the beginning of the end. For them, and for the lies they built their comfort on. That night, I packed quietly, no yelling, no slamming drawers. Just the soft hum of my suitcase zipping shut while the rest of the house carried on like nothing had changed. I left behind my bed, my bookshelf, even my old guitar. I took only what mattered: my laptop, my headphones, 2 days' worth of clothes, and the folder I kept all my financial documents in. The irony, they didn't stop me, didn't ask where I was going, didn't say goodbye. I didn't sleep that night. I drove to a cheap extended stay hotel about 30 minutes away. One of those places with flickering hallway lights, vending machines that still sold Diet Dr. Pepper, and a front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. I collapsed onto the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling with my shoes still on. There was a strange stillness to the room. Not peace, not yet, but something like air returning to lungs that had been held too long. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt weightless and terrified. The next morning, I called my job and asked for a few days off. Kendra, my manager, didn't press. "Take what you need," she said. And Andrew, sometimes walking away is the bravest thing we ever do. I stared at her message for a long time. It was the first moment in years that I felt seen. Over the next few days, I found a short-term rental in Citrus Heights, A little studio tucked behind someone's main house, tiny, clean, with peeling paint and an air conditioner that sounded like a jet engine. But it was mine. No one banged on the door. No one complained about how long I was in the bathroom. No one scoffed at the smell of my leftover pad thai. I started sleeping better, started thinking clearer, until the texts began. At first, it was Mike. Yo, where'd you go? You being dramatic. Bro. Then Mom. Can we talk? Then Dad. You've made your point. Come home. Each message chipped at my resolve, not because I missed them, but because it proved something. They weren't concerned. They were inconvenienced. No, we're sorry. No, we went too far. Just confusion that I'd had the nerve to actually leave. I ignored them. But ignoring didn't stop the bills. Exactly 2 weeks later, I got an email from the bank. Subject line: Past due mortgage notice. My heart dropped. I opened it, scanned the contents, and saw the words I never thought I'd read. Payment for property at 417 Maple Ridge Drive has not been received as of date. I checked the account. No automatic transfer. No scheduled payment. For the first time in 3 years, the mortgage hadn't been paid because I hadn't paid it. I stared at the screen, numb. Not because I forgot, but because I hadn't realized how deep the silence had gone. 3 hours later, my phone exploded. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts stacked like bricks in a guilt wall. Mom. Andrew. The mortgage company called. We're behind. What's going on? Dad. You need to fix this. It's in your name. Wait, what? I scrolled back. In my name. I opened the file folder I had taken from my room, pulled out the refinance paperwork I signed 2 years ago. I remembered the day. Mom had said, "It's just a formality. You're good with credit. And the bank needs someone stable on record." I hadn't thought twice. I signed. Like a good son. And there it was. My name on every page. My signature. My debt. I wasn't just paying the mortgage. I owned it. I felt sick. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. Like I'd been building a house of cards while they stood there watching with matches in hand. I reread the line again. Mortgage holder. Andrew Carson. And everything snapped into place. That's why they never asked questions. Why they never thanked me. Why they felt entitled to everything, because in their mind, I wasn't a son. I was a means to an end. A knock at the door shook me out of my spiral. I opened it. And the landlord, an older woman named Ms. Renee, handed me a package. Someone dropped this off for you. No return label. Inside the box was my old house key, dangling from a neon green keychain, the one I'd used for years. And underneath it, a sticky note in my brother's handwriting. Just pay the damn bill. I stared at the key, the weight of it, the history. This wasn't a request. It was a threat wrapped in familiarity. A reminder that they still saw me as the help, not the homeowner. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I laid the mortgage papers across my kitchen table, turned on every light, and started reading line by line, every clause, every obligation, every legal right I didn't even know I had. And that's when I realized I had the power. They just never thought I'd use it. And the moment I chose to act, that was when the real story began. Because I wasn't going to fight them with yelling or guilt. I was going to fight them with paperwork. That night was the first time in years I didn't feel like prey. I sat at the kitchen table. Stacks of papers fanned out around me. Mortgage agreements, property tax receipts, refinance documents. The walls were bare. The overhead light buzzed faintly, and the old heater let out a slow wheeze every time it kicked on. But all I could hear was my pulse. It sounded like purpose, because the more I read, the more one truth became undeniable. The house legally belonged to me. The refinancing agreement my parents had rushed me into 2 years ago. It had shifted full ownership and liability into my name. I had the deed, the debt, The risk. The rights. They hadn't let me help. They'd tricked me into becoming the owner of the home they still felt entitled to live in rent-free. I'd spent years walking on eggshells, trying to earn their approval. Turns out, they'd already made me their insurance policy. Now they were shocked I wasn't obedient. I looked down at the house key Mike had sent back. It gleamed dull gold against the fluorescent light. Mocking. Familiar. Like they were saying, "You can leave, but you'll always come back. You're ours." But they were wrong. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney, a woman named Marla Levin, early 40s, direct, sharp voice, the kind of person who didn't waste words or pity. I told her everything from the refinance to the current situation. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Carson, if your name is on the deed and theirs isn't, you have full legal ownership. You're within your rights to issue a formal notice to vacate, even if it's my family, especially if it's your family." She said flatly, "They're not tenants. They're occupants. That gives you even more leverage." Her voice was calm. Mine was shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline. "Can you help me do it? Send me the documents and I'll draft the notice." 2 hours later, I had it in hand. 30-day, notice to vacate premises, legal owner, Andrew Carson. It was clinical, cold, precise, but I didn't feel cruel. I felt free. I printed 3 copies. One for Mom, one for Dad, one taped to the front door. Then I got in my car and drove. The street looked the same. The mailbox still had the rust spot from that summer I hit it with a baseball bat. The azaleas Mom planted out front were blooming again. Nothing had changed. Except me. I walked up to the porch, taped the envelope to the front door, tucked the other 2 in the mailbox, then paused, took a breath, and dropped the house key on the welcome mat. One last act of symbolism. One last reminder. This time, they were on the outside. 2 days later, the storm hit. Voicemails, texts, emails, Facebook messages. Even Mike left a 1-star Google review on my freelance site. Selfish. Ungrateful. Hope your money keeps you warm. Mom's message hit differently. I can't believe you're doing this to your own mother. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just shocked that I'd stopped playing the game. Then came the escalation. Dad called and left a voicemail full of quiet rage. "This is your fault. You turned your back on your family. You think this house is yours because of a piece of paper? You think that means anything?" Actually, yes, that's exactly what it meant. Because for the first time, the law was on my side. They couldn't twist this into guilt or manipulation. They couldn't say I was imagining things or being too sensitive. This was black ink on white paper, undeniable, and it scared them. Marla guided me through the next steps. We filed an official affidavit of ownership with the county clerk's office, set a date for the sheriff's department to begin enforcement if they refused to vacate. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. They had violated mine for years. Now the line was legal, visible, permanent. I sent them one final message. "You have 28 days left. After that, enforcement begins. No threats, no insults, just a deadline." Mike replied first. "You've changed." I didn't answer. Because I hadn't changed. I just stopped lying to myself. 1 week passed. Then 2. No response. But then, late one Thursday night, as I was reviewing code for a client, I got an email from Mom. Subject line: "Please talk to me." The body was short. "I don't understand how you can do this. We raised you. We made sacrifices for you. Doesn't that count for something? This house is our life. How can you take that away from us? Mom." I stared at the screen, and I remembered the birthdays she missed. The job offer she told me not to take because it was too far from home. The time she told me, "You'll never survive on your own. You're too soft." And then she asked what counted. What counted was respect, and they'd spent years bankrupting me of that. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the email, added it to my folder of documentation, slipped it in right after the mortgage deed. Proof, not of guilt, but of clarity. 28 days later, I walked up that porch again, not to beg, not to explain, but to see with my own eyes what silence can do when it's held long enough. What I saw, it wasn't what I expected. The morning of day 28 was gray and unusually still. You know, the kind of sky that makes everything feel quieter, like the world's holding its breath. That was the air I walked through on the way back to 417 Maple Ridge Drive, the house I grew up in. The one I bought without realizing it. The one I was now reclaiming. I pulled up across the street and sat in the car for a moment. Hands on the wheel. No music. No movement. Just watching. The azaleas Mom planted were wilting. The blinds were drawn. Mike's beat-up Honda was still in the driveway. So much for moving out. I walked up the steps with slow, steady breaths. Not angry. Not nervous. Just present. For once, I wasn't shrinking myself. I was showing up with every page of documentation, every ignored message, every year of invisible effort trailing behind me like a shadow I was finally willing to look at. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I rang again. Then, just as I was reaching for the knob, the door creaked open, and there stood Mom, barefoot, robe loosely tied, face tight like she hadn't slept all night. She didn't move aside, just stared. "You're early," she muttered. "I gave you 28 days," I said. Calm, measured. "I'm here to check if you've complied." Her lips twitched like she wanted to snap back, but instead, she turned and walked inside. No invite. No apology. I followed. The living room was a mess, half-packed boxes. Piles of random junk. Bags of clothes that hadn't made it past the hallway. Mike sat slouched on the couch, arms crossed, eyes glued to his phone. Dad wasn't there. "You're not moving," I said. Mom let out a bitter chuckle. "We've lived here for 25 years. Andrew, you think it's that simple?" I pulled the official notice from my folder and placed it gently on the coffee table. "This is your last chance to leave voluntarily. After this, enforcement becomes formal. Officers. Locks. Legal records." Mike scoffed. "So what? Sure, you gonna kick us out and Airbnb the place?" "No," I replied. "I'm going to sell it." Silence. Mom blinked. Mike's head snapped up. "You're lying," she whispered. "I'm not. You'd really throw away your family's home for what? Some grudge." And there it was. Not regret. Not sadness. Just entitlement dressed up as wounded pride. "This was never your home," I said. "Not once you made it clear I didn't belong here." That's when Dad finally entered, coming in from the garage, wiping his hands on a towel like he'd been fixing something that hadn't worked in years. He looked at me and said nothing. Just stared. I looked right back. "Did you know?" I asked him. "When you put the mortgage in my name, did you plan to never pay it again?" He shifted. Didn't answer. Which, frankly, was the answer. I stood there for a beat, the silence stretching like rubber. Then I said, "You have 48 hours. That's a grace period I don't owe you. After that, I bring law enforcement." I turned to leave. "And if you damage anything, walls, appliances, plumbing, I'll sue for compensation." Mike jumped up. "You think you're some big shot now? Hiding behind paperwork and lawyers. You're nothing without this house." I paused at the door, then turned, pulled something from my pocket, and tossed it onto the floor between us. The old noise-canceling headphones, the ones I'd worn every day in that house to block them out, now cracked, broken. "You're right," I said. "I used to hide behind those, behind guilt, behind silence. Not anymore." I stepped outside, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from finally reclaiming my name. I didn't look back. 2 days later, I returned with a sheriff and a representative from the attorney's office. A locksmith stood by the curb, waiting for the signal. But when we entered, the house was empty. No boxes, no shouting, no drama, just silence. And a single note taped to the fridge. In my mother's handwriting, "You've made your choice. Don't contact us again." No signature. Just that. I should have felt victorious. But what I felt was strange. Like standing in the aftermath of a storm you predicted, but still didn't believe would happen. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. The walls, once filled with family photos, were bare. Just sun-bleached outlines of what used to be. I wandered from room to room, letting memories bubble up, good, bad, blurry. And then I found it. In the corner of my old bedroom. A shoebox. Inside. My childhood drawings. A photo of me at graduation. And a receipt folded neatly for the very first mortgage payment I'd made. They'd kept it. After everything. That night, I sat in the center of the empty house floor, dusty. Lights dim, and opened my laptop. I had one more move to make. And this time, it wasn't about the house. It was about the legacy they tried to erase. The house echoed. Every step I took sent a hollow sound across the bare floorboards, as if the walls were asking, "Now what?" I sat cross-legged in what used to be my room, just me, a dusty carpet stain where my desk used to be, and my laptop glowing faintly in the dim light. This was the part no one tells you about revenge. When it's done. When you win. When silence settles. There's no applause. No thunderous victory music. Just a long exhale, and the question, what next? But I already knew the answer. I clicked open a folder titled Records. Inside were years of screenshots, bank statements, signed PDFs, every email, every transfer receipt, every message I'd saved. Not out of spite, out of instinct, out of self-preservation. For years, I thought keeping track made me paranoid. Turns out, it made me prepared. At the top of the folder, I created a new document and began typing. To whom it may concern. My name is Andrew Carson. For the past 3 years, I was the legal and financial provider for my immediate family. Below is a timeline of events, supported by documentation. This wasn't about pity. It wasn't even about vindication. It was about reclaiming the narrative. They had painted me as ungrateful, dramatic, disloyal. So I wrote it all, line by line, not just what they did but what it felt like. What it feels like when your own mother calls you selfish the same week you cover her utilities. What it's like when your brother tells his friends you're a basement dweller while he's playing Xbox on a TV you bought. What it's like when your dad pretends your exhaustion is a personality flaw. And then after an hour of typing, I did something I never thought I'd do. I sent the document to Kendra, my team lead, not for sympathy, but because she once told me, "You don't owe anyone your peace," and now I needed someone to witness mine. 10 minutes later, she replied, "Andrew, this is bigger than your family. Would you let me share this anonymously?" Of course. I froze, then typed, "Why?" Because people like you aren't rare. But stories like yours being told, that's rare. Let's tell it right. The next day, Kendra put me in touch with a journalist she knew, Sasha Kim, a local culture writer who'd been covering generational housing issues, financial exploitation, and burnout among firstborns in immigrant or lower-income families. She read my file and called within hours. "You have no idea how many people need to hear this," she said. "You think this is personal, but it's universal." I agreed on one condition. No names. I'm not trying to ruin anyone. I just want people like me to know they're not crazy. Over the next week, we worked on the article. Sasha fact-checked everything. She anonymized details. She framed it not as a revenge story, but as a cautionary tale about boundaries, enmeshment, and silent abuse. When it published, the title read, The Golden Sun Trap. When being good enough becomes a life sentence. Within 24 hours, it had 100K views, then 300K. Then it got picked up by a national digital magazine. My inbox exploded. The messages were overwhelming. I thought I was alone? This hit me in the gut. My sister made me feel like the villain for moving out. Thank you for making me feel sane. I'm 39 and I've been paying my parents' mortgage for a decade. This gave me courage. People from all backgrounds, ages, cultures, from Minnesota to Malaysia, all with the same ache. Somewhere along the line, we'd been convinced that love is a sacrifice, that obedience is loyalty, that being tired equals being weak. And now, one story cracked the glass, but not everyone was happy. 3 days after the article blew up, I got a text from Mike. Nice. Real classy. Then one from Mom. I hope you're proud. You've humiliated us. Dad didn't message. Instead, my cousin sent me a screenshot from Facebook. Mom had posted a status. Beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. Not all blood is family. No name. But the comments were full of sideways sympathy. So sorry. Aunt Carol. Can't believe your own child would do this. Karma will come around. I didn't respond. Didn't explain. Didn't defend. Because they'd lost the power to define me, I began preparing the house for sale. A friend referred me to a local realtor, Tamika, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who walked through the home like a battlefield medic. We'll need to repaint, restage, and replace the old water heater, she said, making notes on a clipboard. She paused in the hallway, where a sun-faded rectangle still clung to the wall where our family portrait used to hang. You sure you're ready to let this go? I nodded. It was never mine. Just my name on the paper. One night, as I sorted through a box of old junk in the garage, I found something unexpected. A cassette tape. Labeled, Andrew, age 6. I dusted it off and brought it back to my apartment. Dug out an old player from a thrift store. Hit play. The audio crackled. Then, my voice high, eager, pure. When I grow up, I want to have a big house with a trampoline and lots of pizza and my own room where no one yells. I laughed, then cried, because somewhere along the way, I'd settled for less than that child wanted. But now, maybe, just maybe, I could still give it to him. The house went up for sale the next morning. And the first offer that came in, it came from someone I never expected. The offer came in on a Tuesday. I was halfway through a frozen burrito, watching dust shift in a slant of sunlight on the empty hardwood floor, when Tamika called. You might want to sit down for this. My stomach sank. Is it lowball? No, she said. It's full asking price. No contingencies. They're pre-approved. And here's the kicker: buyer name. Michael Carson. I froze. My brother. That's what it says. Tamika paused. Want me to reject it? I didn't answer right away. My mind was a mess of memory and instinct. Why would Mike want to buy the house after everything? Why now? Did he say anything? Just that he wanted to make things right. That was it. I stared at the screen. This wasn't part of the plan. Not part of my healing. It felt like the past was tapping on the door, asking if it could come back and wearing a new jacket, holding cash, but still carrying the same old smell. But maybe this was the test. Not of him, of me. I told Tamika to hold the offer. And I called Mike. He picked up on the second ring. Didn't think you'd actually call? Didn't think you'd try to buy the house? He let out a humorless chuckle. Look, Mom's not talking to me. Dad's living in a motel. I've been couch surfing for weeks. But I got a job. Real one. Warehouse shift lead. I've been saving. I know I messed up. But I want to buy it fair and square. Make it mine. Not yours. Not theirs. Mine. I didn't interrupt. I let the silence sit between us. Then I asked, why that house? Because I want to prove I'm not just the kid who coasted. I want to build something. And maybe because it's the only place I've ever felt like I existed. That hit harder than I expected. We grew up in the same rooms but clearly lived very different stories. I asked for 24 hours, hung up, and sat in that quiet studio apartment for a long time. That night, I had a dream. I was back in the house, 6 years old, wearing my Spider-Man pajamas, hiding under the dining table while Mom and Dad argued in the kitchen. Mike was sitting on the floor beside me, chewing on a Lego brick. We didn't talk, just sat together. Two kids trying to shrink into the shadows. I woke up with tears drying on my cheeks. The next morning, I accepted the offer. Tamika was stunned. "You sure?" "Yeah," I said. "He needs a new story, and I need to finally close this one." The escrow process went smooth. Mike wired the payment, signed the paperwork, and within 30 days, the deed was his. We met once outside the house when the final handover happened. He was wearing a button-up shirt, clean shave, eyes clearer than I remembered. "Thanks," he said. "For giving me a shot? You're paying for it," I replied. Still, there was a pause. "I'm gonna fix up the garage. Turn it into a music room. Yeah. Maybe even finish college." "You know," I nodded, then pulled something from my backpack. "Here," I said, handing him the shoebox I'd found. His eyes widened. Inside are childhood mementos, photos, crayon drawings, that first mortgage receipt. He swallowed hard. "You kept this?" "Yeah. Thought maybe you'd want to start your version of home with something real." He didn't speak, just nodded, lips pressed tight. No apologies, no promises, but something truer: closure. As I walked away from 417 Maple Ridge Drive for the last time, I didn't feel like I was losing anything. Not my childhood, not my pride, not even my family. I was choosing, and in that choice there was peace. I moved 2 months later. Different city, different coast. I got a better job, joined a community book club, started dating someone who asked questions and actually listened. I even got my own apartment, with a view of the water, a quiet balcony, and my own damn coffee maker. No yelling, no guilt, just the smell of fresh ground beans and the hum of life on my terms. A year later, I got a postcard in the mail. No return address, just an old photo tucked inside me and Mike, age 10 and 8, grinning with missing teeth in front of the house. On the back, it read, "Thanks for giving me the key. I'm trying to build something that doesn't hurt." I stared at that card for a long time, smiled, and placed it on my fridge. Because that's the thing about freedom. It's not just walking away. It's knowing you could have burned it all down, but chose to plant something else. If you're still here, thank you for listening. If you've ever felt used, dismissed, invisible, know this. You're not weak for wanting peace. You're not selfish for saying enough. And you're definitely not alone. Drop a comment if this hit close to home. Share your story. Or just say "I see you." Because sometimes, healing starts not with a shout, but with a whisper back. I'm here too. Story 2. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 36 years old. And last night, I found out I was just a backup plan in my own marriage. Not in some metaphorical, soul-searching, midlife crisis kind of way. No. I heard the words fall from my wife's lips perfectly pronounced, quietly confident as she stood on the balcony with her best friend, sipping rosé like the world owed her something. "He's just my backup plan. Chloe. Honestly, I'll leave once I'm stable. I'm almost there." She said it with a little laugh, like she was talking about a pair of worn-out sneakers she hadn't thrown away yet. Not the man who buried his mother, handed over his inheritance to fund her studio, and believed stupidly that loyalty meant something. And she had no idea I was home. See? I left work early that day. Something I rarely do. It was our 8th wedding anniversary. and I decided for once to surprise her. Groceries in hand, wine tucked under my arm. I was going to cook. Me, the man she always joked couldn't make toast without supervision. The candles were already lit, flickering warm light across the kitchen island. I just pulled the wine from the fridge when I heard voices soft but clear coming from the balcony off our living room. She didn't know I was there. And I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I swear I wasn't. I was about to call out when I heard my name. That single syllable Ethan and I stopped cold. There was something about her tone. Familiar. Detached. Like she'd practiced this speech before. And this was the first time she dared say it out loud. He's safe. He always plays it safe. Pays the bills. Covers the losses. He's my buffer until I can fully stand on my own. That's when they clinked their glasses. And my world quietly. Precisely fractured. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The candle closest to me flickered a little harder. And I remember thinking, maybe the wick's drowning. What a stupid thing to notice. Right? But sometimes, when everything's breaking inside, your brain latches onto the smallest, dumbest detail. Something familiar. Something controllable. I stood behind the curtain, frozen, staring at the dining table I had just set, one plate slightly crooked. Napkins folded into little triangles like Mom used to do. Her favorite wine breathing on the counter. The lavender bouquet dried, like she prefers carefully placed in a vase in the center. A symbol of thoughtfulness, of effort. A symbol of a man who hadn't realized he was being auditioned for obsolescence. She walked back in a few minutes later, rosy-cheeked from the wine and the self-congratulation, looked up and smiled like nothing had happened. "You're early?" she said, kissing my cheek. I kissed her forehead and murmured, "Dinner's almost ready." We sat across from each other, chewing pasta and pretending the world hadn't just shifted. She laughed at something on her phone. I nodded, pushing my food around like a man trapped in the wrong life. She had no idea I'd heard her. And oddly, that gave me clarity. There's a moment when you've been punched in the gut emotionally, just absolutely leveled, where things get quiet, not peaceful, just still. Everything slows down. You stop begging the universe for fairness. You stop making excuses for people who wouldn't flinch stepping over your heart. You stop needing to be chosen. That night, I lay in bed next to her, listening to her soft, rhythmic breathing while the ceiling fan whirred above us. She curled her legs toward me in her sleep muscle memory. Probably, or maybe instinct. But it felt like a cruel echo of who we used to be. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, playing the words over and over again in my head. Backup plan. Once I'm stable, I'm almost there. You know what really hit me? The arrogance of it. The calculation. As if she had some invisible timeline ticking inside her. Some threshold of success she needed to hit before shedding the man who helped her climb there. And here's the part that'll sting the most. If you've ever been in my shoes, she wasn't even scared I might find out. She genuinely believed I'd never notice, because she thought I'd always be safe, predictable, dependent on her presence. But I wasn't that man anymore. The next morning, she kissed me on the forehead and rushed off to a meeting with a potential investor. Her high heels clicked sharply down the hall like punctuation on her new life plan. And I just stood there, barefoot, watching her go. That's when I opened the drawer. There, tucked beside an old receipt from our honeymoon and a half-dead pen, was the business lease. The one we both signed when she couldn't qualify on her own. I co-signed because she said, "We're building this together." I guess she forgot that part. Or hoped I had. She didn't know the condo was still under my name either, left to me by my mother. God rest her soul. I let Madison decorate it. I let her say it was our place when friends came over. I even nodded along when she suggested selling it to upgrade into a house with more space for her studio operations. But now I saw it all for what it was. A calculated climb. And I had the receipts, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry or beg or spiral. I was going to prepare. Quietly, strategically, surgically. You see, Madison may be brilliant, charismatic, even ruthless when she needs to be. But what she isn't paying attention. Because if she were, she'd know. I've stopped being predictable. And I've started planning. Next time she laughs with her wine glass in hand, thinking she's in control, she'll realize the floor beneath her has already been pulled. And the first crack, it starts with a single email. The morning after I heard her call me a backup plan, I walked into our shared bathroom and saw the lavender soap I'd bought her sitting on the edge of the sink. It hit me harder than it should have. Madison loved everything curated sense. Playlists. Aesthetic vibes. She once spent $700 on a light fixture because it balanced the energy of the space. I remember thinking, yeah. And threw our grocery budget off balance while you were at it. That soap, though, it was a tiny symbol. I'd picked it out myself from a local farmer's market during a client trip to Mendocino. She said it made her mornings feel intentional. Funny thing, now, every whiff just reminded me I'd built my life around someone who saw me as replaceable. But I wasn't going to spiral. Instead, I started taking mental notes. That Monday, we went out for brunch. She wore that silky terracotta dress I bought her last Christmas before I knew. Her sunglasses sat high on her head, hair in that effortless bun she pulls off so well, and she was radiant. You wouldn't think someone plotting an exit strategy could look so relaxed. So the new client, I asked gently, slicing into my eggs, Benedict. Her eyes lit up. Oh, huge. Tech couple from Palo Alto. They want the whole place redone like studio to showcase level. I nodded, smiling. That's amazing. Babe. She didn't catch the undertone. She never does when she's talking about herself. I paid the check. Let her take a selfie with her latte. Even held the door. But I wasn't the man she thought I was anymore. I wasn't financing her future. I was documenting her leverage. At home, I pulled out a binder. Nothing dramatic. Just a navy blue 3-ring from my mom's old desk, the one she used to keep household receipts in. Now it was mine. And Madison. She'd become my case study. Here's what most people don't realize. Madison's studio was technically in both our names. Back when she couldn't get approved for commercial space, I co-signed. The business was new. She had zero credit history under her LLC, and the landlord required collateral. We agreed. Let's do it together. Like a real partnership. So I co-signed the lease. I didn't even blink. Same with the business account. I had access. Not because I micromanaged, because she asked me to help when her first assistant flaked on payroll. Fast forward 2 years, and she had new branding, a growing client base, and enough online praise to make Forbes write a micro feature on her modern feminine design aesthetic. But she forgot the foundation. Forgot who signed off on that first check. Forgot the man behind the camera every time she posed in front of a new finished space. She also forgot something else. The condo we lived in. Still legally mine. My mother's name is on the deed transferred to me after her passing. I let Madison decorate it. Claim it. Even show it off on Instagram as our first property. But ownership, that was on paper. And paper matters. Tuesday night. We hosted a wine tasting at home networking. She called it, mostly her circle. Chloe, of course. A couple of influencers. A guy from a venture fund in Soma. I played the part. Made conversation about Pomerol tannins and listened to someone pitch a scented candle startup inspired by grief. No, I'm not making that up. At one point, Chloe leaned toward Madison and whispered softly, but not softly enough. Did Ethan co-design the new branding? I thought that was all you? Madison smiled. Not even blinking. He helped. He's good with fonts. I laughed. Loud enough to turn heads. Chloe glanced at me, suddenly unsure. She's sharp. I could tell the mood shifted for her. She may not have known the whole story, but something in her posture changed. A new variable had entered the equation. Me. Paying attention. The next day, I made my first real move. I emailed our business accountant. Greg's a no-nonsense numbers guy mid-50s. Works from a desk stacked with 3 monitors and a Keurig that hasn't been cleaned in a year. I asked him to audit the studio's cash flow and flagged a request to start separating my access. Not pulling funds. Just preparing to protect my half. I asked about trust accounts. He asked if we were divorcing. I said no, not yet. Then I reached out to a lawyer. Not a divorce attorney, just someone who understood property law. I told him I needed to tighten up a few things. Nothing messy. Just clear. He nodded like he'd heard that kind of clarity request 100 times. That weekend, we went to her friend's baby shower. More small talk. More curated candids. At one point, I heard someone ask Madison, "You and Ethan ever think about kids?" She smiled politely, then said, "Oh, I'm married to the studio right now. Ethan gets it." Do I? Do I get being a placeholder? She didn't even glance at me when she said it. Didn't need to. I excused myself and stepped outside. The sun hit my face like a slap. It was too warm. Too real. Too different from the filtered world she lived in. And in that moment, I remembered the last real thing she ever gave me. The logo for her studio. I designed it. Late at night, coffee-stained fingers, hovering over Illustrator, while she sat beside me with a Pinterest board and dreams of being featured in Dwell. I gave her that identity. She built it into an empire. And now she wore it like it was hers alone. That night, I walked past her laptop and saw she had an email draft open. Subject line: Partnership Dissolution Planning. I didn't read it. Didn't need to. I just smiled, closed the lid, and whispered, "You're almost stable now." Huh. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen in yoga pants and a messy bun, scrolling her phone. "I'm heading to the studio. Can you forward the email from Greg?" I looked at her and replied gently, "Sure. Everything's being taken care of." And it was, just not the way she expected. The next email she gets, it won't be from Greg. It'll be from someone else. And it'll change everything. The email came at 9:47. Mom. On a Wednesday. Madison was already at the studio. Probably setting up for another influencer walkthrough or sending mood boards to a new client. She was in her element, her curated kingdom of raw textures and neutral palettes. But back at our condo, I sat at the kitchen island, sipping black coffee, watching the corner of my screen blink. Studio financial review request for documentation. Not from Greg. From an independent auditing firm I'd hired through my attorney. Clean. Private. By the book. It was polite but firm, asking for clarity on ownership structure, funding history, and disbursement patterns. There was nothing she could scream about, because on paper, it looked like a routine compliance check. But I knew better. And soon, so would she. That afternoon, I took a slow walk through the studio, something I hadn't done in weeks. It was in a trendy corner of the arts district, all high ceilings, exposed beams, and too many fiddle leaf figs. "Ethan." Madison's voice rang out. "Too bright. Didn't expect you today." I smiled. "Just wanted to see what you've built." She gave me a look half proud, half guarded. Her assistant, Naomi, shot me a quick smile and ducked behind a wall of samples. The place looked successful, polished, like a magazine spread. And yet, standing there, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted echo present. But inconvenient. I ran my fingers along the edge of the display table I helped haul in 3 summers ago. I remembered getting a splinter in my palm and Madison joking, "Design's a blood sport, babe." Now, I was the blood. She was the sport. Still, I kept my tone light. "Everything looks great." She nodded, distracted, tapping on her tablet. Then I saw it, the logo. My design. Clean lines. Symmetrical balance. The exact off-black shade she argued over for hours. She didn't know it, but I'd embedded a tiny monogram of my initials in the lower left corner of the typeface, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. A signature no one else could claim. And now, it felt like a quiet brand of ownership. Not to control her, just to remind myself. I mattered once. I turned to leave. That's when Chloe walked in. Tall, effortless. Always in some linen blend jumpsuit that made her look like she didn't care but somehow won Vogue. "Ethan," she said, surprised. "Didn't think you still came by." Still. She caught it too late. I just smiled. "Oh, I'm around," I said. "You know, still part of the build." Something flickered in her eyes. A warning, maybe. Or guilt. Madison glanced between us. Lips pursed slightly. That night, over dinner, she finally brought it up. "So, got a weird email today." I didn't look up. "Oh, some audit thing for the studio. From a third-party firm. It didn't come from Greg." I sipped my wine. "Right. I asked them to review a few things. We've grown a lot. I figured it was time." Her fork froze midair. "You initiated it." "Of course," I said calmly. "My name's on everything. Can't be too careful with liability these days." She blinked. "You didn't tell me. And you didn't tell me about the email to the investor last week," I said, finally locking eyes with her. "The one about removing me from brand decisions." Silence. The kind that fills the room like smoke. Then she reached for her wine glass, the crystal chiming softly against her ring. She didn't argue. Didn't confess. Just sat there calculating. And I realized something. She wasn't scared. Not yet. Over the next week, the little humiliations piled up like snowflakes, quiet, cold, and suffocating. First, I found out she'd removed my name from the studio website's About page. Then she stopped copying me on vendor contracts. She was untangling me piece by piece, like someone carefully dismantling a bomb. But what she didn't know, I'd already pulled the trigger. I overheard her on a Zoom call. Her voice was crisp, professional, almost sterile. "Yes, the studio is solely managed under my direction. My husband was supportive in the early stages, but he's not involved anymore." I stood in the hallway, just out of frame, listening. Every word sharpened a blade inside me. Not involved. Not important. Not worth mentioning. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it speaks softly into a headset. During a Tuesday call and cuts deeper than anything shouted across a courtroom. That night, I got a text from Chloe. "Hey, everything okay between you two? Madison's been off." That's when I knew. She was rattling. Not collapsing yet, but cracks were forming. Chloe had always been Madison's echo chamber, agreeing, affirming, amplifying. But now, she was checking on me. I replied with just 3 words. "Watch the floor." A few days later, Madison came home flushed, half anger, half panic. "There's a freeze on one of the studio's accounts." I looked up from my laptop. "Really? That's strange." She stared at me. "Did you do this?" "I did what I had to," I said evenly, "to protect my stake." Her face twisted. "You're sabotaging me." "No," I said, standing. "I'm reminding you that I was never optional. You just started believing your own PR." She stormed out of the room. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. But Chloe wasn't done texting. And the next message would unravel everything. Not about Madison, but about me. It was 2:03 a.m. When my phone buzzed. I'd left it on the dresser, screen down, hoping maybe foolishly that I could finally get a full night's sleep. But something about the vibration felt urgent, like a silent knock on the door you didn't know was unlocked. I rolled over and checked. "Chloe, we need to talk." Alone. It's about Madison and you. My stomach tensed. Chloe wasn't the kind of person who panicked easily. Her texts were usually short, breezy, filled with emojis and lowercase letters. But this one, capitalized, punctuated, sober. I stared at the screen a few seconds longer before typing back, me. Tomorrow, 10 At the cafe on 6th, she replied instantly, thank you. By 9:45, I was already there. Corner booth. Back to the wall. Cup of black coffee untouched. When Chloe walked in, she didn't bother with the usual hey. She slid into the seat across from me and exhaled like she'd been holding something for months. I need to clear my conscience, she said. And you deserve to know how deep this goes. I stayed quiet. She looked around the cafe paranoid. Maybe, or just embarrassed. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. Madison's been planning her exit for over a year. The investor she keeps pitching to. He's not just a backer. He's her contingency plan. My jaw tightened. Contingency. Chloe nodded. She's been grooming the narrative, telling people you're checked out. Borderline controlling. She wanted to paint you as dead weight. So when she left, she'd look like the empowered woman breaking free from the guy who held her back. I blinked. Slow. That part actually hurt more than I expected. She's rewriting history. I said. Chloe winced. Yeah. And I helped? In small ways. Covered for her. Laughed when she vented. I thought it was just venting. I didn't know she was weaponizing the story. She pulled something from her bag, a USB drive. She asked me to delete some emails. You might want to see them. That night, I didn't sleep. Again. I sat in front of my laptop, scrolling through email chains between Madison and her silent partner, a VC named Landon Burke. Messages about rebranding without me, pitching the single-woman vision. Cutting ties cleanly. One even read, I just need 6 more weeks. Once Ethan's out of the picture, the cap table's clean. Cap table. That word sterile? Businesslike used to talk about eliminating me from the very thing I helped her build. No tears this time. No shock. Just strategy. If she wanted war, she should have remembered. I'd already drawn the map. By morning, I had a plan. I printed copies of the emails, highlighted the timelines, cross-referenced them with our shared account withdrawals, circled names, flagged dates. Then I contacted my attorney. I'm ready, I said. He didn't ask what changed, just told me to come in. We filed 2 motions, cease and desist, barring her from making financial decisions without dual approval, intent to separate ownership, citing breach of verbal trust and fiduciary misconduct. Legal terms. I know, but in plain English, I froze the narrative. She couldn't scrub me out of the company without scrutiny, and she couldn't claim I was irrelevant when the paper trail screamed otherwise. 2 days later, she confronted me. She burst through the condo door like a hurricane in heels. You went legal on me. I stood in the kitchen. Calm? No. I protected myself. Big difference. Her eyes narrowed. You're trying to humiliate me. No. Madison. I'm trying to remind you, this wasn't yours alone. She paced, breathing sharp, jaw clenched. You're ruining everything. You already did that, I said quietly. I'm just cleaning up. She stopped, chest heaving. You don't get to play the victim. I stepped closer. And you don't get to rewrite me. Silence again. Thick. Ugly. Then she laughed, bitter and brittle. You think anyone will believe you over me? You're the safe one. Ethan. The background character. No one roots for the guy who doesn't fight back. I smiled. Just a little. Then I guess it's good I finally started. That night, I sat on the balcony, her old wine glass in hand, filled with something far cheaper. The city buzzed below. Indifferent. I remembered something my mother once said, years before she passed. Never build a home inside someone else's dream. Day. They'll wake up and you'll be homeless. Back then, I thought she meant love cautiously. Now, I realized she meant don't vanish in someone else's ambition. In the weeks that followed, Madison tried to spin, to gaslight, to charm her way out. But every move she made, I had countered. Every name she dropped, already looped in. Every truth she pitched, backed up by receipts I'd quietly been collecting for months. The truth didn't just protect me. It dismantled her version. But Chloe, she had one more truth left. And it had nothing to do with Madison's business. It had to do with her past. The message came 3 days after the legal freeze. Another text from Chloe. Short. Nervous? Ethan, I need to tell you something. About the beginning. I didn't reply right away. I stared at those words like they were written in a language I'd once known but hadn't spoken in years. Because what beginning was she talking about? The business. The marriage. The betrayal. We met at the same cafe on 6th. This time, Chloe wasn't in her usual effortless jumpsuit. She looked stripped-down jeans, no makeup, sunglasses pushed up into messy hair. She looked human. I don't know how to say this. She started, fingers twisting around the paper sleeve of her coffee cup. But, I think Madison targeted you. I blinked. What? Chloe swallowed hard. I mean, not like hitman targeted, but strategically. From the start, the words hit slower than I expected, like snow falling instead of a punch. But colder. Much colder. She told me once before you two were serious that she wanted someone who could fund a foundation. Someone dependable enough to anchor her dream. I thought it was a joke. I thought she meant emotionally. But now, Chloe slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were 2 printed screenshots, one from an old group chat. One from a journal app entry Madison had once asked Chloe to help her migrate. The first said, "He's got solid credit. His mom just passed. Inheritance equals probable. Stable job. Feels like someone who'll say yes before he says why." The second, "I don't feel anything yet, but he could be useful. I'll try to fall in love later." That sentence, "I'll try to fall in love later," it broke something. Not because it surprised me, but because I realized I'd felt it. Even then, that quiet, indifferent edge in her kindness, like she was practicing intimacy, not feeling it. I closed the envelope and looked up at Chloe. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I've been complicit," she said. "And I can't sleep at night knowing what she's done to you and what she's still trying to do." I believed her. For the first time since this all started, I felt something strange flicker in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was resolve. That night, I pulled up a project folder labeled Studio Brand Archive. Inside, the original logo files, the design pitch I made during a sleepless weekend, the invoice she never paid me for. I uploaded everything timestamped, watermarked, and sent them to my attorney. Confirmed design authorship. I wrote, and prep for IP reversion filing. Because if she wanted to erase me from the story, then she'd have to do it without the name, the logo, or the identity I built from the ground up. You don't get to wear my work like a crown and pretend I never existed. I made one more call, this time, to a client I'd introduced her to years ago, an architecture firm in downtown LA that had helped her land her first major contract. The managing partner, Dan, answered on the second ring. "Ethan, long time. Everything okay?" I kept my voice even. "You should know, Madison may be restructuring her company. There's legal movement, and I may no longer be associated publicly. Just wanted to give you a heads up before any press hits." Dan paused. "That's a shame. You were the reason we trusted her in the first place." Exactly. People forget that credibility isn't built on charm. It's built on transfer. And Madison's entire brand had grown on the quiet shoulders of my consistency. Now those shoulders were stepping away. By the end of that week, Madison's Instagram changed. Gone were the couple photos. Gone was the we language. Gone was any trace of me. She replaced the bio with founder, creator, survivor, survivor. From what? Accountability. Then the messages started trickling in. From mutual friends. From former clients. From people who saw the legal documents and realized the safe husband had a backbone. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I just watched her narrative implode under the weight of truth. But the final piece, that came when I walked into the studio one last time. It was mid-afternoon. Empty. Quiet. Smelled like eucalyptus and expensive wax. Madison was there alone. Sitting on the leather couch with her phone in one hand, a glass of wine in the other. She looked up when she saw me. "You win," she said. Voice flat. "Is that what you came for?" I shook my head. "No. I came for the monogram." She frowned. "What?" I pointed at the logo printed on her wall. My design. Bottom left corner. Under the baseline of the ER, and there's a tiny monogram. My initials. M. You never saw it. She squinted, then froze. "You bastard." "No," I said. "Just the guy who built the brand you tried to bury." She stood, breathing fast. The silence sharp. "You think this makes you noble? Going behind my back?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "It makes me free." I turned to leave. She didn't stop me. But that night, Chloe called one last time. And what she said, it changed everything about what I thought I knew about my mother's will. I was halfway through a glass of bourbon when Chloe called. Again. Her voice was different this time, strained. Almost shaky. Not the polished calm she usually wore like a designer scarf. "Ethan, I just found something. It's about your mom." I sat up straight. "My mom? What do you mean? You remember when Madison and I helped pack up her house after she passed?" "Yeah." "Why?" There was a file folder. Black. Tucked behind some old art prints in the attic. I didn't think anything of it. But I found it again today. Madison had it. She kept it. That alone was a red flag. Why would Madison keep anything from my mom's estate? Especially something I never even knew existed. "I'm bringing it over," Chloe said. "Now." She showed up 20 minutes later. No makeup. Hoodie. Hair still wet. She looked like someone carrying a secret she no longer wanted to hold. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside, and a copy of my mother's revised will, dated 2 weeks before her stroke, and a notarized letter from her estate lawyer, and one small, creased photo of me at age 10 holding up a Lego spaceship, beaming. But it wasn't the photo that undid me. It was the clause. In the event that my son, Ethan Markell, marries, the inheritance shall not automatically transfer into joint marital property unless the marriage surpasses 10 years or produces legal offspring. I scanned it again and again. My heart thudded in my ears. It meant, all that time Madison didn't own half the condo, didn't own half the liquid assets, didn't have claim to anything my mother had built or saved. The clause protected me. Quietly, strategically. My mother had seen this coming. She knew I loved with my whole heart. She also knew I attracted people who might not. And Madison. She must have found this will. She knew. She must have realized that the clock was ticking and that every day she stayed without a child or a 10-year marriage was another day she got nothing. No wonder she pushed for IVF last fall. No wonder she suggested legacy planning while sipping sangria and talking baby names she didn't mean. She wasn't nesting. She was negotiating. I sank onto the couch, silent. Chloe watched me carefully. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Your mom was brilliant." "Yeah," I said quietly. "She was." Then I looked up. "Why are you helping me?" She hesitated. "Because I should have done it sooner. And because part of me always knew you were too good for her." She left soon after. but not before squeezing my hand and saying, "You've got all the leverage now. Ethan, whatever you want to do next. You're holding the map." The next morning, I emailed my lawyer with a scanned copy of the will. Subject: Asset protection confirmation. Immediate action requested. He called me within the hour. "You're clear," he said. "She has no legal entitlement to anything in your name, unless you voluntarily commingled. And based on this document, you're protected." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt air in my lungs that wasn't laced with rage. Madison had played a long game, but so had I. She used charm. I used paper. She spun stories. I kept receipts. That night, I came home to find her in the kitchen, glass of white wine in hand, scrolling through Zillow on her iPad, looking for new places. I asked lightly. She didn't look up. I figured I'd start over in Silver Lake. Something with character. I nodded. "Well, when you go, you'll be going alone." That made her pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stepped forward, pulled a copy of the will from my folder, and slid it across the counter. "This," I said softly, "means your timeline expired 2 weeks ago." She scanned the page. Her expression shifted slowly: shock, confusion, fury. "You knew about this?" "No," I replied. "But you did. And you never told me." She opened her mouth, then shut it. "You planned the whole thing," I said. "Every brunch, every photo, every investor pitch, built on a lie." Madison dropped the iPad. It clattered against the marble. "You think you're better than me?" she hissed. "No," I said. "I think I was better to you than you ever deserved." She stormed out of the room, and I let her go. I poured myself a drink and looked out the window at the dark skyline. Below, a new development was going up, scaffolding glowing in amber light. Some people build stories to survive. Others build structures that last. I was done being part of her story. But the next morning, as I packed a final box of her things, I found something wedged under the bed. A receipt. Not just any receipt. It was for a $12,000 bank transfer. From her business account to a personal account under my name. Except, I never opened that account. Why would Madison transfer money to an account I never created? And who had access to it besides her? The answer would shatter the last illusion I had left. The bank manager leaned back in his chair. His fingers steepled like he'd just dropped something radioactive into the conversation. "This account," he said, tapping the screen, "was opened 2 years ago, under your name. But the signature on file doesn't match any documents we've previously received from you." I swallowed. My mouth was dry, my pulse not pounding but steady, cold. "Who opened it?" I asked. The manager hesitated. "Well, technically, it was opened online. Digital application. But the IP address was traced back to a device registered to a business entity, Rook Design Studio, LLC. My chest tightened. That was Madison's registered laptop. She created a fake account in my name, I said slowly. He nodded. "I'm afraid that's what it looks like." The money was deposited and then moved within 48 hours. Offshore wire. Cayman intermediary. $12,000. Not millions. Not even close to the size of her usual business moves. But that made it worse. Because this wasn't embezzlement. It was insurance. Back home. I stared at the receipt again, creased now, edges fraying from how many times I'd pulled it out of my pocket. A quiet transfer. To a fake account. Under my name. Then off to an untraceable endpoint. She was building a story. Again. And this time, it wasn't just about business. She was preparing a scandal. If anything went south, she could say I was funneling money. Cooking books. She'd already planted the seeds. I was checked out. Resentful. Jealous. A clean little narrative of the sad husband who stole from the woman who just wanted to be free. But she didn't count on Chloe. Chloe came through again. That night, she forwarded an audio file, one I didn't ask for. One she wasn't even supposed to have. Madison. Drunk. At a friend's birthday party last spring. Recorded in the background of someone's Instagram story. Chloe had ripped the audio before it disappeared. Madison's voice. Slurred but smug. If he ever tries to make it ugly, I'll make him look like a thief. I've got a burner account ready. He'll never see it coming. I played it 3 times. Then I sent it to my attorney. With the subject line, "Game over." The civil suit we filed wasn't about money. It was about name clearing. Narrative reclaiming. Madison was served at her new studio's relaunch event, right between a ribbon cutting and a champagne toast. It made headlines. Not because I pushed it, but because the industry smelled blood, and where there's blood, there's press. The court order forced her to forfeit access to shared materials, barred her from using the logo I created, and stripped her of any claim to the legacy we built. Her investor pulled out. Clients started walking. The empire she curated through hashtags and headshots began to fold like origami in a monsoon. I didn't celebrate. Not with champagne. Not with a post. But with silence. I took a long walk along the Pacific. Bare feet in wet sand. Sun dipping low. Leaving everything gold and pink and peaceful. I thought of my mother. Of her quiet intelligence. The way she never raised her voice but could dismantle someone's ego in 5 syllables. I thought of how she'd protected me without fanfare, without conditions. And I promised her, right there on that beach, that I wouldn't let this make me bitter. Cautious. Maybe, but never bitter. Months passed. The studio Madison launched in Silver Lake closed within the year. Chloe moved to Portland. Started her own interior consultancy. She still texts now and then, usually with dog pictures or terrible dating stories. We're not close. But we're clean. And me, I kept designing. Not for someone else's dream. For mine. Small commissions. Thoughtful clients. Things built to last. Not impress. One day, I walked into a cafe and saw a logo on the wall, a clean, minimal monogram. Not mine, but good. And I smiled. Because finally, I wasn't looking for myself in someone else's shadow. So what's the lesson in all this? Maybe it's this. Love isn't a guarantee. Loyalty isn't a currency. And not everyone who builds with you wants to build for you. Sometimes, they're just looking for scaffolding until they can climb high enough to push you off the edge. But the fall, it doesn't kill you. It teaches you to land better. Now, if you've ever been the background character in someone else's story, if you've ever loved someone who saw you more as useful than worthy, if you've ever been erased, slowly, and had to claw your identity back piece by piece, let me tell you, you're not alone. And you are so much more than what they made you out to be. Last week, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, a single note. You were right. I just didn't know how to love anything I couldn't control. I folded it once and tossed it into the ocean. Because closure isn't something they give you. It's something you give yourself.